Good afternoon, Medina City School parents and guardians. I want to welcome you to our late July parent chat. The reason why we wanted to do the parent chat is to provide all of you with an update as to where we're at as a district in planning for the fall. I know there's a lot of questions out there amongst our parents, our students, and our staff. What I do want to share with you right off the top of this meeting is we have not yet made any decisions. So we are in the middle of the decision-making process. The purpose of this meeting is to provide you all information so you can provide feedback. You can provide feedback as we have the discussion, and we will try and answer as many of the questions that we can. We will be doing a fact page, which will be on our website following this chat to make sure that we answer all of the questions that we receive. In terms of a timeline for determining what the start of school is going to look like, we are very cognizant on the fact that many parents need some time to prepare for the coming fall. So we do want to give you a plan in a timely manner. We are talking about a drop dead date in late July or very early in August, where we would announce exactly the direction that we're going. The reason why we're not making an immediate decision, there's actually a couple reasons why. The first is we're still waiting on direction from the state of Ohio. When we've returned athletics a few weeks ago, we had defined parameters that we needed to follow with students' return. We have not yet received any kind of parameters from the state. The state is planning on releasing a restart document for school districts, which is supposed to outline some of these parameters. Just this morning, I was on a state-level phone call, and they had shared with us that plan should be released within the next 10 days. So as we head into early July, I see our planning process really picking up steam. I know in talking with other area districts that many districts made the decision to not even start planning until they had some of those guidance documents from the state. Here at Medina City Schools, I'll speak for myself, and I think my administrative colleagues who are here with us today will say the same thing. That's not something I felt comfortable with. I felt like we need to get some planning in place and start preparing for the fall, as well as getting feedback from our parents. So we basically have two sections of planning that are occurring. The one section has to do with curriculum and instruction. In regards to the curriculum and instruction, that is being led out of our Department of Instruction. The second piece is looking at our facilities and transportation. So there's two avenues we need to explore: how we're going to instruct our students and how we're going to keep students safe when they're coming into the buildings. And I know I'm speaking a little bit about what Mrs. Cassidy is going to talk about today, but we are looking at a three-pronged approach which covers the gamut of online to having students fully return to school. Probably the most common question that I get is, do I think that students are going to be back in the fall? And I can only speak from my gut. And my gut says that I think we're going to have students back in our buildings in some capacity in the fall. So we are right now trying to put most of our attention on plans that bring our students back. The big question and what we're currently trying to work through is exactly what that looks like for students' return to school. Whether we are in a blended online return to school model or we are on a full return to school, it's not going to be a typical return to school. We're going to be looking at a situation where we need to make adjustments to ensure the safety of our students as well as the safety of our staff as we begin the 2021 school year. Before I introduce my colleagues here today, a couple other things I wanted to mention that were in the Gazette this morning as a result of our board meeting last night. I don't intend to get into the district reductions and savings this evening in detail, but I did want to share with all of our parents. I think it's very important, and I'm trying to emphasize that I'm referring to them as savings because we really at this point aren't making cuts. What we're doing is pausing programming we were going to implement for this coming school year, and we're going to push that back until the economy and the funding rebounds. So in terms of the impact on students in the classroom, they are not going to see a major impact from this previous school year. The only thing that they might see at some of our lower grade levels is a slight increase in class sizes. Nothing that's going to be too dramatic. So we intentionally tried to take an approach with this situation that we're in, not to make major cuts. And I said this last night, it's very easy to cut programs. It takes years to bring those programs back. And we are still working on returning programs from the major cuts that happened 6, 7, 8 years ago. So we're trying to avoid being in that situation. And we're fortunate that we were able to save money in the implementation of our strategic plan so that we could be in a position where we could press pause rather than making cuts. Many of the initiatives that we're pausing, and I don't know if pause is the best word or slow motion's a better word, but we are going to be continuing forward with many of those initiatives. It's just not going to be to the same degree that we would have. The second thing I wanted to mention is that the district calendar is something that we are taking a look at. As soon as we have something more definite in working through the district calendar, we will release that to the public. The reason why we're looking at the calendar, and those of you who have college students may know this, but many of the academic institutions are looking at making some shifts and adjustments to be proactive with what's potentially coming up with COVID-19 in the coming school year. Tonight, we did change our panel. I want to thank all of you for being interested in participating in tonight's chat. Originally, we were planning on doing this through a Zoom or Google Meet format. Those formats only allow 250 participants at a time. When I sent out the communication to our parents and guardians, I actually watched the response on our Google form, and within 10 minutes we had well over 250 responses, and currently we're well over 1,200. So we felt it was important to have all of our community members and parents who signed up be able to have access and be able to communicate with us live through this program. It's not ideal as to what I was thinking about in having that face-to-face component, but I think it's the second best thing, and much better to allow more people to be involved. So at this time, I'll introduce our panel, and then we're going to get into some presentations. Following the presentations, we're going to look at some of the questions. First, I want to introduce Valerie Pavlik, our Board of Education President. Dr. Chris Kwolek is our Assistant Superintendent. Tina Cassidy is our Director of Instruction. And Mina Pazitka is our Director of Pupil Services. So at this time, to talk about the instructional components around the plans that we're looking at, I'm going to turn it over to Tina Cassidy.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As Erin said, I'm going to talk a little bit about our back-to-school options. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the process of how we came up with these options. We started off, and I know a lot of you probably participated in these, in sending out surveys to parents, students, and staff. We had a very, very good we had a lot of response on those surveys, and we used that information. We had a back-to-school planning committee meet starting at the end of May. This back-to-school planning committee consisted of around 30 teachers, teachers and central office staff. We chose teachers that we felt were really expert in technology, knowing that technology may play a big part in the education that we'll be seeing in the fall, and also blended learning. And we'll be talking a little bit more about what blended learning looks like in a minute. So that back to school planning committee reviewed the surveys that we talked about, and then they began draft plans for the fall. We then sent those draft plans to our district leadership team. Our district leadership team consists of all teachers, CDCs, our teacher leaders, we call them CDCs, and our administrators. They reviewed the drafts of the planning committee and gave us feedback, and now tonight we're here for your feedback. So thank you again for coming. Our parent, student, and teacher surveys. We had over 1,800 people respond to our parent and student survey, 1,300 parents and about 500 students. Most of those students were from grades 6 through 12. Our teacher survey, we had over 350 teachers respond out of 400, so that was a really good response rate. About half of them were elementary and half were secondary, so it was a good representation of our teachers. Another thing that we looked at when making these options are the safety guidelines from the state. So as Erin said, the state will be putting out a reset restart guide. They actually sent out a draft around mid-May, and that is what we've been working off of. I have a link here, reset restart guide. That is a link, a live link to the draft of the guide if you'd like to take a look at it. Amy is going to be putting this presentation on our district webpage, so you'll be able to look at it. So the safety guidelines within the Reset Restart Guide, those are guidelines that we're expected to utilize in collaboration with our local health department. So now we'll get straight to our back to school options. Our first back to school option is if we went back in the fall completely online. This is the most restrictive option. Again, we used results from the parent and student survey to help us come up with what our all online school would look like if that is what we go to in the fall. These are the results, or at least a summary of the results from the parent student survey. People wanted more synchronous learning, and synchronous learning means real-time learning, so teachers would join students through Google Meet. Students would have a specified time where they would have to sign up online. They also wanted more personal asynchronous learning, so when teachers sent videos, they wanted the videos to be of the teacher doing the lesson. They wanted more consistency between classrooms. People felt that moving between Blackboard and Google Classroom was hard. They also felt that within Google Classroom or within Blackboard, the way classrooms were set up were so different. So navigating online learning and having all those different platforms and different setups was difficult for some parents. And so that's something that we're going to consider. Grading and feedback came up a lot on the parent-student survey, that changes needed to be made there. And they also suggested that they would like more training for parents and students on online learning. Since online learning was so new in March, people felt like some students had trouble navigating the online learning, and so they thought more training for parents beforehand would be helpful. So going to what online learning would look like for the Medina City schools in the fall. I called it Online Learning 2.0 because it would look a lot different than what we just had this last quarter. Again, all students pre-K-12 would be online. All teachers will utilize Google Classroom for consistency. So if we're all online, we'll all make sure that we'll use the same platform to make so that all kids will have it, it'll all be consistent. All Google Classrooms will be streamlined, so not only will we all be doing Google Classroom, but we'll make sure that they're set up similarly. Learning will be synchronous and asynchronous, so we will make sure that we have videos of the teacher teaching classes and also live Google Meets where kids can come together and talk and have class together. We will, the grading system will change. We went from a participation grade these last 9 weeks. If we go online, again in the fall, our grading system will reflect student learning and will look more like a normal grading system that we've had in the past. A lot of parents were also concerned about social emotional considerations. Students want to be with their friends, they miss that interaction with their peers. So those are things that we're beginning to talk about in my department, how we can make sure that if we are all online, how we can get students together to talk and make sure that their social emotional needs are being met. And then we also talked about starting a parent and student online learning boot camp so that parents could sign up and they could learn about, if they're unfamiliar with Google Classroom, how to use Google Classroom, how that works, and students the same way. So again, option number 1 would be online learning, and this is what our option number 1 would look like. Option number 2 is a hybrid model, and this is less restrictive than the first option. Again, we used the reset and restart guidelines that were in draft form. Some of the reset restart guidelines that we took into consideration, our students and staff were required to take their own temperature before coming to school. They would have to maintain social distancing at least 6 feet apart among all persons on school grounds and buses. All persons on school grounds and buses will be required to wear face masks. Hand sanitizers available for personnel and students, frequently clean surfaces, and clean and disinfect after every cohort of students. And then there would be additional precautions if there were any flare-ups of COVID-19. So those were all the things that we had to keep in mind when we were planning for a hybrid option. This is just a short or a quick visual of what social distancing would look like in the classroom if that was an expectation that we had to have students sit 6 feet apart in the classroom. If you look here, you would see that 9 to 15 students in the classroom. That would be what we would probably be able to fit in most of our classrooms that are 650 to 900 square feet. So that's the model that we would have to look at. Social distancing on the bus. You can see if we have to keep kids 6 feet apart on the bus, we would be able to fit in a half to a third of all students on the bus that we normally do. So what hybrid learning would look like or could look like in our district, we have a couple different options under this model. Option number 1, we would have students broken up into 2 cohorts, A and B, and probably we would look at separating by alphabet. So the beginning of the alphabet would be A, the end of the alphabet would be B. Cohort A would meet face-to-face, and when I say face-to-face, I mean they would go to school as normal, and they would go to school on Mondays and Tuesdays. Cohort B would meet face-to-face at school on Thursdays and Fridays. And we did Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays so that we could have Wednesdays to do a deep clean, because that was part of our reset restart, that in between cohorts that we do a cleaning. On off days, so student A would be in school Mondays and Tuesdays. On off days, which would be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they would have online learning. And then student or cohort B would be the opposite. They would have online learning Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and then Thursdays, Fridays, they would be face-to-face. Option number 2, one of the things that principals and teachers really worried about is how to keep kids 6 feet apart at lunch and recess. So option number 2 could be where secondary cohorts, and that's grades 6 through 12, might go to school until 12:40 and then leave, and then they would have lunch after they left. Elementary cohorts then would have school in the afternoon, 12 to 3:30, and we would assume that they would have lunch beforehand. We would also offer brown bag lunches to students so they could pick up lunch and then go home, or elementary students could pick up lunch and then eat in their classrooms, kind of like how some kids are doing breakfast right now. So that would be another option, and that way there would be no worries about how lunch and recess would work. Option 3 would be if elementary cohorts A and B are hybrid, meaning they would follow the same Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule, and have secondary be all online. So all of these options are dependent upon guidelines from the governor and the health department, and then how we can figure our space and schedule constraints. So that's basically what our hybrid learning could look like. Face-to-face is our third option, and that is least restrictive. It's the option we all hope that we can get to, we can't wait to safely get there. That would be where all staff and students go back to school all day, 5 days a week. So, and of course, we would adhere to health precautions per the governor and our health department. So what are the next steps for us? We wait. As Erin said, we are waiting to hear what the final reset, restart guidelines will be. In the coming weeks, we should be finding out. We're going to use feedback from staff, students, and parents to come up with options that are available to us. And then staff and parents will send out another survey and ask for feedback again. And then, as Erin said, hopefully by the end of July, beginning of August, we'll come to a decision. That is basically our program.
And thank you, Tina, for providing all that information. And again, I'm going to reiterate that we are in the planning phases. So the information that we are sharing with you this afternoon are our initial thoughts and plans as we're moving through this process. These are going to change and be adjusted as we receive feedback, both from our community, our staff, our parents, our students, as well as we have more information regarding the guidelines that were mandated to follow with the return to school. One thing I do want to address is, why do we have 3 different plans, and why can't we just easily choose a plan and go with that plan? The reason why is because it's dependent upon the parameters that we have to follow with the return of students to school. And Tina touched upon this a little bit as she went through her presentation. But when you're talking about social distancing within our school buildings, with the current standards that are in place with 6 feet, it's not possible for us to adequately social distance. Again, one of the requirements that's out there right now is that you can only have half the capacity within a building or any given room. What we don't know is how this could change as we head through the summer. We've seen a lot of changes with things opening back up since this all started in March. I'm hoping that trend continues here in Ohio, especially Medina County. We have seen numbers flatten out and lower. It's looking like, and again, we'll know for sure when we get the reset restart final document, but it's looking like we are going to be working very closely with our local health department in developing our plans as well as making decisions. I can tell you that we are not in this alone as a school district. I'm on a weekly, multiple times a week basis meeting with districts across Northeast Ohio, as well as districts across the state of Ohio. So we are all discussing these issues together. One of the organizations that I'm a member of is the Akron Area Superintendents, which includes superintendents from Medina County, Summit County, and Portage County. And we've had a lot of discussion about mirroring each other's plans. So I think you're going to see similar plans coming out from the various school districts. I don't think they'll be exactly the same, because based on size and facilities, each will have to adapt and make adjustments specific to their plans. The other piece that I want to point out is, and I did see a few comments on here about this, because we start the school year with one plan doesn't mean we're locked into that plan for the entire school year. Our goal is to be flexible, and that's why another reason why we're preparing multiple plans, so that we can adjust and adapt to whatever happens with the state orders as well as COVID-19 as we head through the school year. So if we are in a situation we're online or we're in a hybrid model, and it's released that it's safe to return, we're going to have our students return to school. We want our students in our buildings. We know that that's the best environment to work with our students. And I know our parents have worked very hard in trying to serve as dual roles. But to have our students back in front of their teachers really is the ultimate goal. At this time, we've received several questions and comments about special education. And I would like to open up some of the conversation to Mina as well as Chris to address some of the questions that have come up regarding services and how services may be impacted in these various models. The other one that I want to address personally that I saw in here is the cutting of special ed services. And I want you to know that with our district savings, we are not reducing any special education services for our students. So they're going to be receiving the same services that they've always received. So at this time, Mina and Chris, if you could talk a little bit about special ed.
Sure, thank you. There were some questions about some related services being potentially cut, like speech, OT. Just like Mr. Sable shared, anything that is on a student's IEP or agreed upon with the team will continue for those children. We do have to follow those mandates under IDEA, and we will continue to strive to do what's best for our kids, and whatever needs and services they have will still continue for them.
And I think, Mina, you can address preschool as well. I think there were some questions about our preschool. So all public school districts have to provide preschool for students with disabilities. And so that preschool is something we run. We have not made a determination on that preschool yet. The preschool also has typical peers in it. So I don't know if you wanted to share anything about preschool, but some of the questions were what's going to happen with preschool, if we've made any decisions on that yet.
Yeah, and we haven't made any decisions in terms of accepting and for our typical peers what our plans are. But right now, we will continue to serve our students that are on IEPs and require those special education services in any model that we choose to move forward with.
And I think something right along the lines with students with special needs, a number of parents have asked, and Mina and I work with students as well that have medical conditions or are in high-risk groups. And as we do during other times, we'd work with those individual families with their physicians to talk about whether it's safe for their return to school based on what the doctor or the physician is recommending. So if your child's in a high-risk category, we would work with you individually if there's a return to school and you and your physician feel like returning to school is not safe. We would talk with you about that and provide those services based on your child's individual needs. I think there was another question to that extent, if there is a COVID diagnosis of a student or if there's a high-risk student or someone's quarantined. Same thing there. We provide what's called home instruction for students who have medical conditions and are out for extensive periods of time. So that would be the case as well in this instance.
Another thing I'd like to address is there's been a lot of comments regarding masks, and I know individual parents have reached out to me regarding the whole mask question, and unfortunately the answer to that right now in regards to will students and staff be required to wear masks, the answer is I don't know. It depends what happens with the health regulations and orders as we head into the fall. The hope is that that restriction is less, but right now it's a wait and see. I can tell you that with the return of our athletic programs or whenever we've had staff in the buildings, masks are required. With our athletes, they wear masks to and from their trainings. And they take them off when they're working out. Our coaches wear them the entire time. And you can see I've got my mask here around my neck. As we're working around the office or in the buildings, we're very cognizant of having those masks on. And we intend to follow what the orders are or what the recommendations are of the health department. The next thing I wanted to address is band. I know I talked about athletics and athletics starting back up, and we have a phased process for athletics starting back up. I do want you to know that Dr. Kwolek and I have been working this past week with our directors, Tyler Skidmore, as well as Jason Locker for band. Both of these programs typically have camps or other types of programming that operate over the course of the summer. Just at the end of last week, it was released by the health department for us to allow those music programs to come back. We're in the process of developing a plan for them to return that's very similar to athletics. I anticipate that Tyler and Jason will be reaching out to their music programs probably by the end of this week as those plans are developed. And we could have those programs returning as early as next week once we have those guidelines in place. And like I said, those are going to be very similar to what we're doing with athletics. Again, those will be flexible programs or flexible guidelines. That's why there's various phases so that we can adjust to what's ever happening with the COVID-19. Also with the Career Center has been another common question that's come up, and I just want to tell you, as you see me using my phone and computer, we're all communicating here and juggling multiple sites that we're receiving questions on, so we're trying to answer as many of these as we can. In terms of the Career Center, I am regularly in meetings with Steve Chrisman, who's the superintendent of the Career Center. I know they're having very similar discussions as to what we're having as school districts, and they are part of the collaboration process that I shared with you earlier. I personally think the Career Center is in a very difficult situation simply because online learning or distance learning in many of the programs that they offer with licensure just isn't possible. I know it's not ideal for us, but for them, in many cases, it's not even possible. I anticipate that we will continue to collaborate with the Career Center, and I would imagine that many of the decisions they end up making are going to be reflective of what we make as school districts here in Medina County, and that's why we're continuing that process of communication. The other common question I've received is if we're going to have virtual programming for families that don't feel comfortable for their students to return, where we could potentially have a model, and this was not something that was shared today, where we have students that return full-time and we have students that are online full-time. And my answer to that is yes, right now that's a possibility. I don't know whether we'll go that direction or not, but I will tell you it is one of the conversations that we're currently having. Our district surveys are really playing an important role in the decisions that we're making. I think Tina shared we had approximately 1,800 people respond to our last survey. And the information we received from that survey was that the majority of our parents felt like they were comfortable with students returning. Of that percentage, there was a chunk that said they weren't sure, and from the responses we got, I'm guessing that that's on parents waiting to see what the environment is like in terms of COVID-19 as well as what our plans are like. We are going to be sending out another survey, which I anticipate will be more detailed now that we have some direction with the plans in July to get additional feedback from you once we have more information from the state.
Erin, I just wanted to jump in. I know some people are asking the question, what's the difference between orders and guidelines? And so I think I could give an example, and everyone else can feel free to jump in. So I know there's been a lot of discussion that we're just being given some recommendations and that we can make individual district decisions from those recommendations. So I guess what we would give an example to that question. We're being told, and the local health departments are being told, this 6-foot distance is not a recommendation, it's a mandate. So that would be an example of something we have to then take and follow. And I think Mrs. Cassidy showed you the diagram then of the classroom. So I know there's a perception that the state is just making recommendations, not mandates, but they really are mandates when kids have to social distance and adults have to social distance. So the same thing would be the case with the no more than 10 people in groups. And so we did that with athletics, and band will be doing that as well. So you can't be in groups of any more than 10 at this time. So those are the kind of things that while nobody's mandating a plan, we still have to follow that rule in order to create our plan. So I know that was someone's question, and I wanted to give those two as an example. And I think Mrs. Cassidy did a nice job of trying to explain we have to take those mandates then and incorporate them into a classroom, and that's how it restricts the plan that we can come up with. And when you can only have kids not within 6 feet of each other, and you can only have groups of 10, you can't just return to normal at this point, because those two things themselves don't lend to a regular classroom environment. So I just wanted to make sure I answered that question.
The other thing I want to come back to as well that I see a lot of questions about is the school calendar and potentially pushing it back. And again, no decisions of this have been made. We're actually still physically working with the calendar at potential options. When we work with a school calendar, it's not as simple as it might seem in regards to balancing the staff's work year with the students' instructional time. And then the whole other piece that fits into that picture is the Career Center and collaborating with the other districts that attend the Career Center so that students have similar times off. I do want to share with you the two big things that we're looking at in regards to the calendar. The first is the potential of pushing back our start date. The reason why we're looking at a potential pushback of the start date is, for one thing, it would allow more time for hopefully some of the COVID situation to clear up and get us in a better position to have students returning to school. The other piece is that we want to make sure our staff is prepared for students to return. So like I had mentioned earlier, we're going to be working on some adjustments with our facilities, which could be procedural, or it could be actual physical changes within some of the facilities to help with social distancing and other items like that. So we'd like the opportunity before the students return to work with our staff to prepare them for those changes. One example that I anticipate is definitely going to happen is the regular sanitizing of classrooms. Desks are going to need to be sanitized anytime that another student goes into that desk. It's not possible for our custodians to be able to do that, especially when you're talking about a building like the high school. So we're talking about ways to sanitize desks between periods, and I anticipate that our students will be involved in that, that we'll have sanitizer and they'll wipe down before and or after that they use a desk. The other question is, how do you social distance in a building in terms of class exchanges as well as the cafeteria? Those are many of the issues that we're going to be tackling once we have the restart documents from the state of Ohio. Some of the things that we've been talking about and some of the discussions that I've heard from other school districts is the development of one-way hallways so that students aren't facing each other moving through the halls. One-way stairwells. The other option is just having less students in the building, which is why we're looking at that hybrid model. In terms of social distancing in the cafeteria, in some of our buildings, especially if we only have some of our students in the facility, I think we will be able to handle that fairly easily. Buildings like Root, they have an adequate size cafeteria area where we could spread tables out. Other buildings, it's much more of a challenge, like Heritage, where they're utilizing their gymnasium as their cafeteria as well. And that's why we're going to develop an overarching plan for the school district in terms of the facilities, and then go down to each building at each building level and address specific needs for each of the buildings. So more information about the social distancing, whatever those guidelines are in place, will be coming out as we move closer to the end of July, and we're prepared to provide you with the definite plan that we're going to be moving forward with.
And Aaron, I just want to make clear, I see some of the comments. I was in no way implying that option 3 was not an option, and we have not made a decision. I just wanted to give an example of how I think there's a little bit of a misperception that school districts have complete autonomy, and really we have some restrictions we have to work within. So I think we all are trying to brainstorm together. If kids have to be kept, and adults, all of us have to be kept 6 feet apart, and can't be in groups bigger than 10, how do we make school work? So do we use more spaces? I know some people are commenting, do you use outside spaces? It's kind of like we did with graduation. You just have to kind of try to think outside the box, given the parameters you have at the time. And I think we're also very hopeful that maybe the 6 feet or the groups of 10 gets expanded in the coming weeks, and we have other options available to us. So I think we're trying to have an open Q&A and dialogue, and just being honest with you about the parameters we have to work within, and being open about the fact that we aren't under an all things are open as a possibility, though we wish they were. So the other thing I know some people have presented to Mina and I is that medically their children cannot wear masks, and we actually have the same situation with students. So we would work that in the same way. We'd work with your physician, and if they provided a note that your child cannot medically wear a mask due to a medical condition, again, that would obviously be excused, as we do with other medical things.
And adding on to what Chris was saying in terms of some of the restrictions we may or may not be facing as we start the school year, the document that we're working with, the draft document that was released approximately 4 weeks ago, just to give you a little bit of background on what's happened with that, is the Governor DeWine, met with superintendents across the state a couple of weeks ago, when that document, or very close to when that document was supposed to be released. And what was communicated to Governor DeWine is that many of the restrictions and requirements that were within that document just were not reasonable for a return to school, and that many school districts would have no choice but to stay online. So the state, the governor, has worked with the health department to take more time to work through whatever those expectations are going to be. And we're hoping that the document that's going to be released in the next week or two is going to be much more flexible for us to work with school districts. To answer the question about having all the students come back, with some of the restrictions that are in place, it wouldn't be possible to have all our students come back. So if the current restrictions, as the draft document is written, we couldn't physically do it if we wanted to. And the reason why is because we don't have the room in our buildings to socially distance with the amount of students we have. And even maybe the bigger issue that we just touched upon but didn't get into is transportation. The current guidelines would only allow approximately a third of our students on a bus. So just getting the students to school would be a huge issue. And that's why on the last survey we sent out, one of the things that we talked about or asked about is parents potentially transporting their own students. And I see a comment here that Plan 3 is out. Plan 3 is not out. And the reason why is because we don't have the updated information from the state yet. And once we have that updated information, then we'll be able to roll that out and let everybody know.
Some people are asking about the draft Reset Restart guide. It will be on the PowerPoint that Amy will put on the front page of the website, so you will be able to access it that way.
I think a lot of the comments, too, are exactly the discussions we're having, especially for those of us who have younger kids. How do you keep 6 feet on the playground? How do you do those kinds of things? So that's why I think you'll see some of the plans Mrs. Cassidy presented didn't involve lunch and recess, because we're trying, at this point, with the restrictions in place, to avoid those times. So I don't know, Mrs. Cassidy, if you wanted to talk about, I think it was the second plan, that is why lunch and recess were removed, because those seem to be the hardest times, I think, in talking with our elementary principals about keeping those guidelines.
Right, that was one of the options under the hybrid model, to have students attend only for core classes, have elective classes possibly be online. Again, that's not something that we've decided on. It was just an option that we threw out there, just knowing that it is going to be hard to keep students 6 feet apart. But that is something that the principals are looking at and working on to see if they can make happen.
I see there's some questions regarding class sizes, so I want to provide some clarity in regards to that. And I think some people may be confused about the two things that we've talked about this afternoon. The first discussion I had regarding class sizes was with the savings we're trying to put together heading into the school year. And what that means with those savings is we're taking a very serious look at our retirees and which positions need to be replaced, and are trying to lessen the amount of staff that we need to add for the upcoming school year. So that's why I said there could potentially be a slight increase in some of the elementary class sizes. That will only be experienced if, and I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when we have all of our students return to school. The reason why is because if we're in a position that we need to socially distance, we're actually going to have fairly small class sizes, because it's going to be dependent upon the social distancing guidelines and the amount of students that we would be able to have in a classroom. For instance, right now, with the current draft that's out there, we could only have 12 to 15 students in a classroom with a teacher at a time in order to appropriately social distance. So this would be a situation, I've heard various ideas how this could be handled. I've heard discussion about running a classroom or two classrooms next to each other and having teachers team teach between those classrooms. Another model, which is one Tina shared today with that split days, maybe teachers see half their class for the first 2 days and their second half of their class for the second 2 days. So again, that reset document that's coming out is really going to be important in providing us with guidance. The other thing I want to assure you is we're not going to leave you out and hanging. And I'm going to put myself out on a limb here, but if we're in a situation come early August, we are going to be prepared to roll out a decision, because we know we need to do that, because that's what's best for our students and in helping our parents prepare their children to return to school, as well as allowing adequate time for our teachers to prepare for that return to school. So I know I've personally been frustrated at times with the information coming out or not coming out at the state level. And ultimately, although we're trying to collaborate as much as we can, our concern and responsibility is for Medina City Schools. And ultimately, that is what our focus is going to be on. And when we make these decisions, and I feel like we're in a position, in a no-win position, just because there's so many different perspectives on COVID-19 and so much mixed information that's out there. But I do anticipate that we're going to make a decision that not everybody is going to be happy with. But the decision that we are making is going to be what we feel like is the best decision for the safety as well as the education and academics of our students. And again, I want to emphasize that these are going to be flexible programs. Just because we start the school one way doesn't mean that we're going to stay within that kind of programming. We're going to make adjustments dependent upon how the plan is going, and even more so dependent upon how things are going in terms of COVID-19 cases.
Erin, I just wanted to address a couple questions. One is the CARES Act. As far as I know, and our treasurer, school systems aren't receiving funds from the CARES Act right now. So I think we're open to the public, any ideas you have, but at this point in time, public school districts cannot receive CARES funds. I know, for example, Medina City is doing a nice job of keeping track of expenditures, the city of Medina, for those kinds of things, but at this point, we're not getting direct funding for that. The other thing, I know a lot of people are talking about vaccinations, and that's another area that Mina and I work on. So a school district itself, at least in Ohio, does not mandate people get vaccinations. The Ohio Department of Health does that. So I know some of you were asking if we would be mandating people get vaccinated. We don't do that as a school district. It would be the state of Ohio that does that, but at this time, the state doesn't mandate any vaccines. You can always sign a waiver if you do not want your child vaccinated. So I know that was a question about vaccines here as well.
Yeah, and I want to provide a little more information on the CARES Act funding. I actually just received some information in a state level meeting this morning. But I'm looking at our treasurer from across the room here. I believe the state has approximately $100 billion. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's the number I heard this morning that's supposed to be utilized as discretionary funds and distributed amongst public entities. And it has not yet been determined how those funds are going to be split up, or what kind of parameters may or may not be around those funds. So I think it's not just schools that are a little bit in limbo with that, but it's other government agencies as well. And like Chris said, our treasurer, Dave Chambers, is keeping track of all COVID-related expenses, because we're hoping that we will receive some federal funding that we'll be able to utilize to reimburse some of those costs.
And Erin, I'll ask Mina too, because I don't claim to be an expert, but I know a lot of people are asking how are daycares able to be open. It's my understanding that daycares are at limited capacity. I, again, am not an expert on this, but I don't think daycares are at full capacity, so that's how they're operating at this time. Again, if you go to the Ohio Department of Health's website, they have operating standards for every business as they open them. That's what we used for athletics, and then as we open each thing, we get permission from the health commissioner for our guidelines. So I know Mina works more directly with the daycares. Is that your understanding as well with daycares?
Yes, their capacity has definitely been much more limited in order to serve the children.
We appreciate the big turnout that we had for this chat, and we are nearing the end of it. And it was not possible for us to be able to answer all the questions or comments in the period of time allotted. That we are going to be going through these questions over the course of the next several days and answering them and providing on our website information with these questions answered. It's important to me that you know that you are being heard and you do have a voice in this process. I just want to make sure that you understand that there are some parameters that we're working under, and it's not a situation where we can do whatever we want. I did see somebody make a comment about reaching out to legislators, and I do think that's a very good comment. Many of these decisions are coming through legislation. I also want to make sure that you all know that we're working very closely with legislators as well. I'm meeting along with other Medina superintendents with our local legislators approximately every 2 to 3 weeks. In addition, through the Alliance, we're working with districts across the state with legislators across the state, so we do have a voice. And we have seen the legislators responding. Just last week, there was a Senate Bill 319 that was presented, and those had several measures in them to allow districts more flexibility for this upcoming school year. And that was adopted into House Bill 164 off the top of my head. And most of the components that were in that Senate Bill 319 were put into the House bill and passed. That's something that's going to be presented to the governor to sign. And this morning it was shared that it will be sometime late this week or early next week. And my point in all that is we are working with the legislators, and I would encourage you to reach out to your legislators as well, because they are listening. The House is going on summer recess, which I believe runs through Labor Day within the next week or so. It was shared with us today, however, that the Senate will be meeting off and on to conduct some state business over the course of the summer.
I was going to try to answer a couple quick questions, if that's okay, Mr. Sable. I think, oh no, I need to find them. Someone asked if online learning wasn't the best option for their child, Mrs. Cassidy, if we do happen to be in a situation where we're online. I think some of the buildings, if they reached out to their principals, some of the buildings did provide paper packets if the student had trouble with online. So I think we could do that. So if any of your students were struggling or do struggle in the future, I really recommend you reach out to the principals or the teachers. Would that be?
And another question I saw was about devices. We will have more devices available for students. Students in grades 2 through 12 will be given a Chromebook at the beginning of the year, regardless, because that was part of our one-to-one initiative. So there will be more devices out there too.
I'm going to turn to our panel here and just see if there's any closing comments from any of our panel members before we close out for the evening.
Mr. Sable and Mrs. Cassidy and Mina and Chris, I just want to thank you all for your efforts reading through these comments. And I want to assure our parents in the community that the decisions have not been made. It really is a moving target. It seems everything, just as when you watch the news and the new reports, the new governor's orders, when these folks sitting here think that they have it and they're going in the right direction, they have to do a 180. And I just want to thank you all. You're doing a tremendous job keeping our students' interest at the first and foremost, and I know that you will definitely make the right decisions or the best decisions for our students. Again, it's not going to be perfect because we can't accommodate 1,000 different scenarios, but I know that you are committed to doing what's best. And this is very an interesting format because it truly was all live. There were no canned questions. We are all scrolling through these questions and trying to answer the ones that kept repeating themselves. So, but again, thank you for all of your hard work because I know our community, our parents, and me as a parent, we really appreciate it.
I was very encouraged by parents who are asking how to contact their legislature. So I will make sure when Amy posts this presentation, we at the end let you know how to contact your senators and congressmen and legislation, because I think that's a very important thing, and we can do a better job of letting you know how to contact them, because your voice is much more important than our voice, even because it's the parents' voice. So we'll make sure at the end of the presentation we let you know how to do that as well. But again, I want to reiterate what Val said, is that no decision has been made, and we were here to share kind of the parameters we're under, and then what we were thinking based on the parent surveys, the student surveys, and then the input from staff.
And in just closing out, I'm going to get a little bit cheesy, but it's how I really feel. I want you to know that Medina and Medina City Schools is a very special place. And it's during these difficult times when you really get a true measure of the people around you. And we're very fortunate here, not only with the parent support and the parent community passion for the school district, but in addition, our employees, whether it's the custodians, which have been doing deep cleaning all summer, to our kitchen staff that has been making food available for free and reduced lunch students, to our teachers that have put in quite a bit of time outside the regular school year to work and collaborate with us to develop these plans that are best for our students, to our administrators who are working tirelessly to get these plans together and try and communicate things out to staff. So thank you all and have a good evening.